So you perhaps know that the United Church, most United Churches follow a set of readings called the Revised Standard Lectionary, which takes us on a 3-year journey through many of the stories that are perhaps most important, that we're most familiar with in the Old Testament and in the Psalms and in the New Testament. For the past few weeks, the Hebrew Bible readings that most United Churches have been following have taken us through this book of Exodus and through some of those iconic stories about Moses, that legendary leader of the Israelite people. That series of readings started at the end of August with the birth of Moses, and I don't know how well you remember those stories. Perhaps you remember back from Sunday school days about how Moses' parents hid him in the reeds of the River Nile so that he wouldn't be put to death, because this was at a time when the king of Egypt apparently had ordered that all the Israelite boys should be put to death. But miraculously, Moses was found by the king's daughter, and amazingly she raised him, so he wasn't put to death like many Israelite boys were. Then the following weeks went on with other highlights in the story of Moses. There was the story of the burning bush, when Moses was called by God to lead the Israelite people out of slavery in Egypt. Then there was the story of the first Passover, when Moses prepared the Israelite people to escape from Egypt. And then the story of the crossing of the Red Sea, when Moses, the story is that Moses parted the Red Sea so the people of Israel could escape from Egypt, and when they went off into the desert. And then the last couple of weeks, there have been stories about the people of Israel wandering around in the desert, complaining because they were hungry and thirsty, but Moses and God finding ways for them to have food and water despite being in the desert. So this week, we're at the time when Moses prepared his people to switch from a long time of wandering aimlessly in the desert to actually occupying what they considered to be their promised land, where they could settle down and end their nomadic ways. And whether you believe those stories to be literally true, or whether you see them as myths and legends, they're still important for us to understand, I think, because they are part of the foundation of our faith, as well as the Jewish faith and of the Islamic faith too. So this week, Moses prepared the people of Israel by giving them rules to live by, starting with the 10 Commandments, and then going on in later verses and chapters with hundreds more and more laws about how they were supposed to live together. But it's these 10 Commandments that I want us to think about this morning. So what do you know about the 10 Commandments? Here's a short quiz. Who brought the 10 Commandments down from the mountain? Was it Moses, or was it the actor Charlton Heston? And who directed the 10 Commandments? Was it God, or was it Cecil B. DeMille? I ask those questions rhetorically because a lot of what we think we know about the 10 Commandments may have come from that iconic movie, 1956. It was produced, but of course it gets shown lots on TV. Movie called The 10 Commandments, and I was thinking of watching it as I was preparing to think what to say today, but then I found out it's almost 4 hours long, and I don't think I had the ability to watch a 4-hour-long movie, so I decided not to do that. And besides, I'm not too keen on the politics of Charlton Heston, so that would have made it difficult to watch without thinking about his politics. There are websites on the internet that suggest that preachers preach a 10-week series of sermons about each one of the 10 Commandments. I wouldn't want to do that, even if I were leading worship here for 10 consecutive weeks. You'll be happy to hear I'm not going to do that. But there are a few commandments that I would like to say a few words about. Because I did do some research and I found some things that I thought were interesting. For example, do you know there are differences of opinion about what those 10 Commandments actually are? For example, they begin with, I am the Lord your God, you shall have no other gods before me. So is that one commandment or two? In the Jewish Talmud, it's considered 2 commandments, but in our reckoning it's just 1. And then there are ones that we heard about coveting. There's, you shall not covet your neighbor's house, or his wife, or his slaves, or his animals, or anything else. So is that 1 commandment? Does it lump houses and wives and slaves and animals and everything else all into 1? Or is that 2 or 3 different commandments? Different translations seem to have different views on what those 10 actually are. And a couple of thoughts about some specific commandments. One says, you shall not kill. But then in the same chapter, there are lists of crimes for which the punishment is death. And in the next few books of the Bible, we hear about foreign armies being slaughtered by Israelite armies and celebrated as if all those deaths were the will of God. Do you see some hypocrisy here? In that commandment that says, you shall not kill, who is it the Israelites were not supposed to kill? Because they seem to kill lots of people. Then there's the commandment that says, honor your father and your mother, so your days can be long in the land which the Lord your God gives you. But I can't find, and I don't think anyone's found any explanation of how living long on the land can be related to honoring your parents. I'm sure there are lots of people who have honored their parents, but have not lived long on the land. And something else that amazed me about the 10 Commandments. Do you know that the second version is quite different from the first version? I didn't even realize there were 2 versions. After the story we heard today, which says that God actually spoke those commandments, Moses went up to the mountain and God gave Moses 2 stone tablets with those commandments written on them. But after a while, Moses came back down from the mountain with those 2 stone tablets. And do you know what he found? He found the Israelites had made a statue of a bull out of gold, and they were worshipping it, exactly what God had told them not to do. And in the words of Exodus 32, verse 6, Moses found that the people had sat down to a feast which turned into an orgy of drinking and sex. Moses was pretty angry by this, and so he chastised them for their bad behavior and for not doing what God had told them to do. And he slammed down the set of stone tablets, and they broke into pieces. Oops, I bet Moses was disappointed by that. And he didn't have crazy glue, so do you know what he did? He went back up the mountain, and he received a different set of rules from God, and he wrote them on a second set of stone tablets. Those original commandments that we heard today were in Exodus chapter 20. But the second set, the different commandments, are in Exodus chapter 34, where it says, Moses stayed with the Lord for 40 days and nights, eating and drinking and nothing. And Moses wrote on the tablets the words of the covenant, the 10 commandments. And it's interesting to contrast Commandments 1.0 in Exodus 20 with Commandments 2.0 in Exodus 34. There are some similarities, but there are some significant differences. For example, both versions speak about worshipping only one God and keeping the Sabbath holy. But version 2.0 also has, don't cook a young sheep or goat in its mother's milk. And do not offer bread made with yeast when you sacrifice an animal to me. And you know those commandments that we heard in version 1.0 this morning about killing and stealing and lying and coveting? They all seem to have dropped in version 2.0. So I always think that a reflection in a church service should have some relevance to things that are happening today. And I've struggled for days and searched for a couple of weeks to see what the relevance of the 10 Commandments is for today. And to be honest, I don't think there is any. I don't think those 10 Commandments are as important as they've often been made out to be. Heresy, you may be saying. Some churches in the past have had lists of 10 Commandments posted up on their walls. Perhaps they were seen by some as a guide to Christian living. In the United States recently, there have been some huge controversies about whether it's appropriate to display monuments of the Ten Commandments in their courthouses or other public buildings. Supporters of the idea of doing that seem to imply that the Ten Commandments are the basis for the rule of law in the United States. But detractors of those monuments speak of the commitment in the states to the separation of church and state. I was thinking about the way we've used the Ten Commandments, and it seems to me we've used them for some nefarious reasons in the past. Some church-going people still look at the Ten Commandments to judge themselves. They say, well, I don't kill or steal or bear false witness, and I haven't made any graven images lately, and I try not to work too much on Sundays, so I guess I can check off most of the boxes, and I must be a pretty good person. Other people, unfortunately, have looked at the Ten Commandments to judge their communities, and they say, just look at the way people these days are taking the Lord's name in vain, and how young people don't respect their parents anymore, and how all the shops open on Sundays. Yes, these people think we're certainly not obeying God's laws anymore. I don't think that either of those uses of the commandments is good, because I don't think the Ten Commandments are a valuable standard against which to measure ourselves or our community. Maybe they were 3,000 or 4,000 years ago, but we've come a long way since then. When Jesus was asked, which is the greatest commandment in the law, do you remember what he said? He didn't single out any of those 10 commandments, either versions of the 10 commandments. Instead, he quoted some other verses from the book of Deuteronomy and the book of Leviticus, when he said this: "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind. This is the great and first commandment. And the second is like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself." On these two commandments, Jesus says, depend all the law and the prophets. And it seems to me that that is how we should measure ourselves and our community. We shouldn't check ourselves off against the 10 commandments. We should check ourselves off against those two commandments from Jesus. Are we loving? And are we putting that love for God and for our neighbors into action? According to a later book in the Old Testament, the book of Ezekiel, when the people of Israel were in exile and in despair, they cried out to God saying, "How should we live?" And that same question rings down through the ages. How should we live today? And I think we can simply not worry about the 10 Commandments 1.0 or 2.0 versions or all those associated rules. We should focus instead on those two great commandments that Jesus quoted. I guess each day we could ask ourselves, in what way today can I best live out my love for God and my love for my neighbors? And we can ask ourselves, in what way does my community and my neighborhood live out love for God and love for all the people who live in my global community? I think only when we and all of our neighbors feel truly loved and cared for and cared about can we say that we collectively are living as God wishes us to live. Amen. And I want to close with a prayer, a short prayer written by a pastor, writer, and musician called the Reverend Fran Pratt, and it's used with her permission. Let us pray. God, we have all kinds of reasons to feel smug. We follow the laws. We donate to charitable organizations. We pay our taxes. We go to church on Sundays, and we don't cheat or steal or murder. We may have a lot of self-righteousness, but only a little humility. See, God, we've forgotten that behind the letter of the law, there is the Spirit. That behind the commandments, there is love God and love neighbor. We can follow every law and obey every commandment, and it won't change our hearts or fill us with your Spirit. Holy One, Don't let us do all this work to maintain appearances and never have our hearts opened. We need to go beyond the law to the inner person, and we need to be renewed in our inmost being. We need our laws to be reflections of our loves. Love for you, God, and for our neighbors. What we need is deep heart and soul healing. We need the presence of Christ in us. Straighten us out, God. We need your help.